Joseph Patrych is a recording producer and the owner of Martin Patrych Memorial Studios in New York City, known for many well-received recordings and videos of classical music. As a freelance producer for many prominent record companies, his CD recordings have received various awards and nominations. He has also designed and built recording and archival studios for several universities, as well as private studios. Welcome, Joe.
Pleasure to be here, Sherry.
Can you tell us a bit about your early life, both musical and non-musical, and how you came into record producing? What is a producer anyway?
What is a producer anyway? Well, I'll get to that later. I mean, my story isn't to some extent typical of my background. I'm the child of immigrant Holocaust survivors. And as a child of immigrant Jews, one of the things you had to do was take music lessons. So in most cases, you were stuck either taking violin or piano. It's a good thing. It's a good thing I didn't take violin lessons. I'm sure all the cats in the neighborhood would have run screaming. But I started piano lessons at the typical young age, 7 or something like that. And to be perfectly honest with you, I hated it. I think it had to do with the non-motivational character of my teacher. She was one of these local piano teachers that wanted you to play lots of pieces with pa in the bass. That gets old real fast. Try listening to 100 Schubert waltzes in a row and you'll get the idea. So I guess around the time I was 13, I quit. But I always played even after that, usually like folk songs and things like that on our crappy old upright. But I kept doing that. And in the meantime, when I was in school, I was kind of on a medical school track, but somehow lost interest in it, primarily because I think I got a summer job in a hospital when I was 17. And that killed my enthusiasm for medicine as a practical application. You know, hang around a hospital for a while and it'll happen to you too. But I never lost my interest in medicine, and we'll talk about that more later. But somehow my interest in music got rekindled by, believe it or not, listening to American pop songs of the early 70s. I spent a lot of time after school, because that was my first year of college when I was 17. And either after or before school, depending on what my classes were, I would often spend a lot of time listening to AM radio. Now, people who don't understand the history of radio in the United States would not understand that AM radio was the provenance of pop music as well as talk shows. So I listened to a lot of pop music on AM, and over a period of a few months, graduated to listening to more interesting rock music and then progressive rock. Now, if you know anything about progressive rock, there's a lot of classical influence in bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis. You know any of these names?
A little bit, yeah. Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're very highly classically trained. Elton John, for example, you know, Royal Academy of Music trained pianist. So was Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So I got more interested in progressive rock and the textures and all that, which morphed into a short period of listening to jazz. And by the time I was 19, I had started to embrace classical music again. And I voraciously devoured it. I can honestly say that's the truth. I voraciously devoured it. I started listening to tons of classical music and absorbing it, and started playing again, really playing. In other words, starting to learn pieces. I mean, the most audacious thing I did was that when I was around 20, after really not ever having any serious classical background, I took it upon myself to learn the Liszt Sonata. I didn't get all the way through the piece, but I did get all the hard parts. And it never amounted to anything in terms of performance, but my interest in classical music became very, very significant. And I was doing a lot of listening and learning pieces, started looking at scores and stuff like that. And then probably the thing that got me really into it was that a friend of mine who was a student at Fordham University needed somebody to help him program the classical music programs, which was called the classical concert. It was 6 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Needed somebody to help him with the programming. So he asked me to do it, and I was helping him. I was creating programs, classical programming. And then in the spring of 1977, the radio station offered us a slot on the schedule to do a program. So my friend, his name is Bruce Posner. He's been a friend of mine for 50 years. And we went to high school together, actually. But we didn't know each other well in high school. But so we started a program called Concert Grand that started in July of 77. Now, by this point, I had already started going to concerts with some regularity. And in 1975, actually, November of 75, I heard my first piano recitals and my first classical concerts, incidentally, because I'd gone to rock and jazz concerts before that, from the time I was about 17 or 18. So my first classical piano recital was George Bollett. And my second, a week later, was Vladimir Horowitz. Not much room to go up from there.
You're very lucky.
I was lucky, yeah. I don't think I was smart enough to realize what I was hearing at that time, but it was a great exposure to great piano playing by truly great artists. Anyway, we started doing the show, and we started interviewing pianists, and the show lasted 17 years, and we did somewhere between 500 and 600 interviews. And we did panel shows comparing recordings and things like that. But it was that really got me into the classical music world. And it also was the reason I got into technology, the technical end of it, because when you're producing a radio show, you have to know how to record, you have to know how to splice tape, to edit together interviews. And this is in the days when interviews and editing and all that were all done on analog tape, which meant when you were cutting an interview, you were using razor blades. This is not a technology that the young crowd can even wrap their head around. When I talk about this to people, because I give lectures on the history of recording and sometimes and things like that, I really have to explain in great detail everything up to the CD. They seem to be fairly conversant with CDs, unless they're really, really young, like under the age of 20. Then they don't even have that much experience with CDs. But the ones that are, let's say, around 30 or whatever, they're pretty conversant with CDs, but they don't know anything about old analog tape, about reel-to-reel, about cassettes, about all those early formats, about it, editing with splicing tape and razor blades. I mean, this was the archaic days compared to now. You know, digital editing now is so precise. It's like brain surgery compared to digging a ditch. When you talk about the precision of modern editing versus the precision of editing, say, in the late 70s, before digital really came in. I mean, digital is actually 50 years old. It was first invented. It was invented before, the concept was invented before the first functional digital recorder appeared in 1972. The first commercial ones were about 10 years later. Although they made digital recordings, experimental recordings, as early as 1979. But the point is that that's how I got into the technology and how I became a recording person. So the producer part has to do with the music knowledge and what a producer actually does. But the rest of it is, I learned by experience and reading and all that, how to place microphones, how to record various ensembles, the techniques to whatever, the equipment required to do it, multi-track, whatever. And I started learning how to edit. And so I first edited analog. And then in 1995, I started digitally editing, which was a little late because digital editing actually had become fairly common by the late 80s. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
I have a side question from what you just told us about the history of recording. I heard that there's a bit of a comeback of vinyl records. What are your views on that? I mean, the quality.
My views on that is one word: why?
Yeah, it takes up so much space, right?
I mean, without getting into technical gobbledygook, let's just say that an LP is not a faithful rendition of the original source material. It can be close, but there's very, very serious technical limitations to playing back an LP in terms of dynamic range, in terms of stereo width, things like that. But there is a lot of second harmonic distortion on LPs, and our ears like second harmonic distortion.
Oh.
So it's one of those things where people listening to it think it's a pleasing sound. Personally, I think it's atrocious, but that's me. No, I'm not going to go out and buy any modern LPs. Not my cup of tea at all.
Right. Well, I guess some people like retro things.
I know, and they're expensive too.
Oh yeah.
But physical media. This is the other funny thing about it. Physical media is going away so fast. I would say that now 2/3 of the commercial recordings I do never end up on a CD. They're only for downloads because people don't want physical media anymore. Having said that, I myself am a physical media fanatic. I have thousands of artifacts of recordings on physical media, going back to 78s, LPs. I have tons of CDs and tons of recordings on other digital formats like a DAT. It's digital audio tapes, a small tape format that was very popular in the late 80s, heading into the 2000s, actually. I have lots of media like that. And of course, tons of stuff on hard drives, which is the way we store things now.
Yeah. So I remember when I visited your recording studio in New York City, I was so amazed at the setup of your Steinway D piano. I had a little play on it, and there was the climate control storage room. You seem to be doing so many projects all at the same time. Do you ever get time to sleep? And how do you ensure all the various deadlines are met to the highest standard?
Well, I like to joke that I'll have plenty of time to sleep when I'm dead. But the truth of the matter is that if you know how to manage your time, everything gets done. It doesn't always get done expeditiously, but it gets done. And, I also, when things get really, really busy, I have colleagues who I trust who I can farm out things like editing work, video work, stuff like that, because one person just can't do it. And I've never had the inclination to try to start a quote unquote company in terms of having to have employees. Not interested in that, never was, because there's a lot of hassles involved with it and a lot of paperwork. And I'll say this, I already do lots of paperwork, especially because I feel like archiving and annotating properly of recordings, especially live concerts, which is my real passion, requires a lot of work and a lot of time. And one has to budget one's time. You have to have a little time to do things well. I'm talking to somebody who knows that more than anybody I know. I mean, between all your activities and raising 4 kids, how much sleep do you get is the question.
Yeah, so I understand you also sometimes travel out of town um to do recording and yeah, you just
Oh, yeah, of course. All the time, actually.
yeah.
But that's okay. That's fine because, there are circumstances where one has to do it. If I'm doing orchestral stuff or large chamber ensemble or whatever, uh, I mean, I can't do that in my studio. It's not big enough. My studio is relatively small as far as the physical layout. It's very high end, but it's relatively small. So I can do small chambers, solo piano, voice and piano, things like that. But if I have to, also a lot of venue work. I do a lot of orchestral recording in the field of ensembles, live concerts, things like that. So yes, I do travel a lot. Tomorrow is a big travel day because I have to go first up to Yorktown Heights and then into Manhattan to do 2 different recordings.
Is there a lot of equipment that you have to bring along with you, or do they?
I have it well figured out. I generally don't need to bring a lot of equipment. I bring what I need, as well as a few backups. But when it comes to doing this kind of boilerplate recording, like I'm doing tomorrow morning, which is a video and stereo audio, it's 20 minutes setup, and I know exactly what I have to do and how it has to be done, and everything is all ready to go. So that's easy. That's not even hard work.
You
Setting up an orchestra recording, that is hard work.
yeah. Do you record overseas much as for overseas orchestra, or mostly like within the
I
US?
mean, I've done couple of things overseas in Netherlands. I did a recording, and I did some stuff in England, and I've done a lot of stuff around the United States. But these days, I don't really want to travel too much.
Yeah,
I
post-COVID.
find I find I personally find traveling a chore.
Uh-huh.
Some people live to be on a plane and go hither and yon. I'm not one of those people. I live in what I consider to be the greatest city in the world.
All right.
So I've got a lot of stuff here, a lot of orchestras, a lot of concerts, a lot of everything.
Yeah, talking about concerts, I've always enjoyed the Clavier House concerts that you host and live stream on YouTube. And I never actually imagined myself performing there until a few months ago, actually, opportunities arose. And tell us about the artists that you invite and a little bit about the different processes between like live streaming concerts and studio recording. Do you find live streaming a satisfying alternative to in-person concerts?
Does anybody? I doubt it. That anybody really does. I mean, look, the whole live streaming thing came into being because of COVID. It has its place. We can't be everywhere. I have 2 very good friends who are in the finals of the Honens competition in Calgary. Now, I am not going to travel to Honens to hear a piano competition. So luckily it's being live streamed so I can actually listen to them. So, there are advantages to it. And I personally like live streaming from a director's point of view. I love switching cameras and panning and zooming and tilting and all that stuff. It's all very natural to me. So I love doing that, actually. I really do. But to me, live streaming can never replace being at an event. And of course, keep in mind when you're at an event, the thing that creates the sound is the hall. If you're in a good hall, if you're in a Carnegie, if you're in a 92nd Street Y, if you're in the Philharmonic in Berlin, you're going to get a great musical experience simply because the sound is so great. Notice I didn't mention Geffen in that. There's a reason for that. Huh?
I don't even know that name.
Oh, that's former Avery Fisher.
Oh, okay.
It just went through its fourth renovation.
Uh-huh.
I believe it's the fourth one. Because the acoustics were so bad there. I haven't heard it myself yet. I've got a few reports saying that they didn't improve it significantly, but they sure as heck spent a lot of money on it.
All right.
But the lobby looks nice. I was actually in the lobby the other day, and I ran into one of the violists of the New York Phil, and she told me that while in the old days, I mean, well, let me put it the other way. It currently looks like an airport.
Oh.
And she said, well, that's better than how it looked before, when it looked like the Department of Motor Vehicles office. Right. Which is actually very true, a very astute observation. I don't know what the acoustics are like, but, to me, sitting at home and staring at a computer screen, which I already do for 3-4 hours a day, to watch music, not my ideal thing, but, we do what we got to do. I like I say, I will watch things when I can't be there if they're available. From an originator point of view, I like getting the pianists out there that deserve to be out there. And that's how I pick people for my series. I like to get people that are either remarkable pianists and interpreters or very good pianists and interpreters who have an interesting program, maybe of unusual stuff, because I'm a little bit of, you could say, a fanatic about offbeat piano repertoire, unusual repertoire, which, when it comes to Scriabin, which is what we are talking about to a certain extent here, one starts off, I think when becoming acquainted with the music of Scriabin, I think it's kind of like a progress, a continuum, because late Scriabin, not the easiest thing to absorb if you're not used to it. So, you start off with early Scriabin, you get to know, the first couple of sonatas, the Opus 8 etudes, the early mazurkas, things like that. And you learn his early, what is often called his Chopin-esque style. But then as you go later on, you start to get the efflorescence of what Scriabin is about in terms of his own musical language and his own ideas of harmony. And it just keeps getting more and more unique. I mean, more and more unusual, I should say. Unique cannot be qualified that way. But by the time you get to the late period, I think it is unique. I don't think anyone else ever wrote anything like that. There have been attempts to imitate it, but his musical mind and the ideas that he had about harmony and structure were absolutely his own. And it's a pity he only lived to be 43, because it would have been interesting to know what kind of music he would have written in 1935, but he died in 1915.
Yeah, this is why I'm putting together this 150th festival to reconstruct Scriabin. Even with his very short lifespan, he did so much, and sort of just.
But a lot of these composers did. I mean, look what Chopin accomplished in 39 years.
Yeah.
Look what Schubert accomplished in 31. We'll never know the direction these composers would have gone had they lived 20 years later than they did, 20 years longer than they did. I mean, in Chopin's case, we have a certain sense, because a lot of his late pieces started to head towards an interesting harmonic world. Like the cello sonata has a lot of interesting harmonic things in it that had he lived 10 years longer and written more pieces, might have become very interesting. I mean, to me, it's a little bit like Rachmaninoff, whose first 39 opuses that were while he was in Russia. He wrote the Etude Tableau, or the last thing he wrote before he left Russia in 1917. And then, of course, he had a lot of time in the States where he was performing in order to make money, and he didn't have much time to write. By the time he wrote the Fourth Concerto, which is Opus 40, in 1926, it was clear that he absorbed a lot of music outside Russia. And so his last 6 opuses, Opus 40 to 45, represent a very different kind of Rachmaninoff from the earlier stuff. Now, in the case of Scriabin, so we don't go too far afield, he never had the experience of going overseas, of getting to know, other countries. He must have heard things, but he didn't have a chance. So it's so interesting to try to figure out where this development of his harmonic language came from. That's a very important thing, I think, when it comes to Scriabin.
Yeah, I feel that all the other interests that he had on philosophy, theosophy, everything actually went into his music. Yeah,
correct.
Quite amazing. Yeah. So in a recent Clavier House recital, 87-year-old pianist Mikhail Voskresensky, he played a number of Scriabin pieces. He's also a presenter at this festival. What is it like to be friends with so many distinguished musicians? Is there any special requirement when recording music from different musical periods or styles? For example, is there an ideal sound for Scriabin's music? What kind of quality do you look for when you're recording?
Well, first of all, that's a multifaceted question, because one thing about knowing artists is, you want to get all these perspective. And I'm very lucky because of my radio show and my career as a recording person and my knowledge of piano, which some people think is fairly substantial. I have gotten to meet many, many, many pianists, many high-end pianists, many top of the profession pianists. And it's always interesting interacting with them and talking to them and finding out what they think about things. I mean, real intellectuals that I'm very happy that I can call friends are people like Andras Schiff, Yevgeny Kissin. I mean, they are thinkers. They are not just executants. They don't just push buttons on a keyboard. They really think. I mean, the one thing about somebody like Andras, for example, is that no matter what he plays, whether you think he's off base or not, it's never going to bore you. It's always going to have details and phrasings and ornaments, even in pieces other than Bach. I mean, his Bach ornamentation is spectacular, superlative, in my opinion. But everything else he does is always very interesting. It shows a very thoughtful musician. And it's honest. I don't think there's anything about it that one can say is contrived. Voskresensky, same thing. I mean, I knew who he was from way back because he was head of Moscow Conservatory, and he got third in Tchaikovsky, in Clyburn, the first Clyburn in 1962. He got third prize. So I knew his name for many, many years. And then I got a call from actually Dmitry Rachmaninoff, who told me, "Did you hear about Voskresensky?" And I said, "What?" And he said, he's living in New York now. I said, "What?" Because I knew he was not a kid. I didn't know exactly how old he was, but I knew he was in his mid-80s. Turned out he was born in 1935, so he was 87. So remarkably, he had come to the States and emigrated from Russia at the age of 87 with a young wife and a 4-year-old child in tow, and taken up residence about a mile from where I am in the Bronx. And so I met him, and actually he was practicing in my studio a few times because he didn't have a piano when he first got here. But of course, I had the idea to have him on my series, and he happily said yes. And I got to say, for an 87-year-old pianist, it was pretty damn good. Mozart's Scriabin and Schumann Carnival.
Yeah.
I mean, he showed the wisdom of many years of experience with these pieces and remarkable executional ability. Who could ask for more?
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to his presentation with actually coming from the recital itself. Yeah, at the festival. Well, I assume someone like you had some diverse interests outside of music. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of interest because remember, I was in the medical field for a while. I actually worked in the medical field, even though I didn't end up going to medical school or attempting to be a doctor or anything like that. But I have a very strong interest in medicine, especially cardiology. It happens that a very close friend of mine, who's also a very good pianist, is professionally a cardiologist. So I guess you could say he's my doctor, even though I don't need a cardiologist, but he's in general, my doctor. And we actually talk about it a lot. And I read up on it. I study a lot of things relating to the human body, anatomy, things like that. I mean, not on the level of a doctor because I don't have time, but it's just one of the interests I have. I also have a lot of interest in the law, in the legal profession, especially the Supreme Court. And I sometimes read their decisions, which is not easy to do because they're extremely lengthy and very technical. Luckily, my girlfriend is a lawyer, so she can help me out with that sometimes. But, these are the kind of things that, these outside interests. I think a cultivated musician, I mean, while I have a great interest in literature of many different kinds, except modern fiction, which doesn't interest me at all, I don't understand how people can read things like, well, I won't mention names, but you know who I'm talking about.
Okay.
But literature, is one of those things where you have to have time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a lot of time to read. And when I do read, it's mostly the news. I read the New York Times a lot. So that keeps me abreast of what's going on in the world, which I try not to let it become upsetting, but it can.
Well, maybe I should send you more of my poems so you can have a bit of a
you are the most fertile poet I know. Are you up to about 3,000 now?
3,580, I think.
Pretty good. Over how long a period of time?
Not yet 2 years and a half.
Okay, so you are writing about 5 poems a day?
On average. But yeah, no, these days I write more longer ones, so maybe less than that. But well, I can do one sitting and over a couple of hours I can come up with 50 haiku, something like that. So that helps with the number. Not that.
No, I mean, look, the number is interesting. The quality of the poems is what's really important, but the quality of your poetry is actually quite high. So it's quite impressive what you do.
I like to.
And you play cello and piano and other things.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus those 4 kids hanging around.
Yeah. They all play like woodwind instruments. Even though my original playing was for a string quartet, that did not come out the way I wanted. But there's a couple of them sing as well. So,
but are they playing a diverse enough group of instruments that you might eventually be able to play like the Mozart Wind Quintet with them?
Yeah.
Really? Is one of them playing bassoon?
Oboe, clarinet, bassoon, flute. But flute is very new. She only just started this year. So
is it Zoe who's playing flute?
Uh-huh.
And that's your youngest daughter, and she's 8 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that does leave me with the option of French horn, so I will take that up later.
You're going to take up French horn.
Oh yeah.
You are going to take up French horn?
Yeah, we'll try. At least give it
Be forewarned. As somebody who tried to play oboe at one point, and they say French horn is harder than oboe, and I said,
I have heard that.
I hope that's not true because oboe is pretty damn difficult.
Yep.
But it's a wonderful instrument.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand. I don't understand in some orchestral pieces how the composer had a vision of writing the way they did for horn, because it's almost impossible. Some of the things that some of the early 20th century composers wrote for horn. You know, sometimes when I'm listening to a modern piece and I hear a horn lick that's better suited for a clarinet, I say to myself, either this composer knows the greatest horn player in the world, or they're completely deluded, because no horn player is going to be able to get through this. But they do. They somehow manage.
Well,
good luck with taking up French horn.
Horn solos in a romantic repertoire. They sound amazing. Yeah.
I know, they're wonderful, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time.
All right? What's your favorite horn solo? And I have a personal.
Enough, so I cannot say that I have a favorite one. But just whenever I hear one, that's just you can really always pick out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you for your time. I'm also looking forward.
My pleasure.
Meeting you again next time I'm in America, in New York City.
For sure. Or maybe I'll even come to New Zealand. Who knows?
That would be great too. I mean,
that would be remarkable. I want to visit that part of the world quite a lot. All righty. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you. Wow, that